Colleague service, today we have a theme that is Hydra-headed. We are being called upon to get up, serve boldly, while we transform our church and the nation. And to associate with the reflection of the chairman, this cannot come at any other opportune time. We are being asked to be entrenched and recognized in our various churches and be relevant for God and country, and in fact, beyond the shores of Ghana. We are to get up. It means that we have not been too active in recent times, or we are cold, and so we are being admonished to get up and work. In the Bible, to get up means that to prepare. It means you have to prepare for a task. Prepare oneself for a task. Or work hard and give service to the kingdom. Preparing for action, to secure, fasting, and equip oneself and get battle ready for a piece of work. Men of old in the Bible were getting up when they had a piece of work to do. So they gathered up in their girdle so that they can free their legs to do the work at hand. So calling on us today to get up means that something serious is at stake. And we shouldn't be surprised that we are being called today to get up, because account of Matthew 24:13 thereabout talks about the last days where the love of God and his work and the love for mankind will grow cold. So if we are called today and we are being called upon to get up, it is a worthy charge for all of us. But the question is, getting up for the altar, how do we prepare? How do we get up for the altar? From Monday to Sunday, that we are on rota and we have to mount the altar, do we mount it so casually? Or is it business as usual to all of us? We are being told in Ephesians that as Christian warriors, we should get up our loins, just our loins, with the belt of truth. But today, the leadership of the service ministry is asking us to get up totally. It's a call for total getting up, spiritual getting up, mental getting up, and physical getting up. Not just our loins. To get up spiritually, an account is given. Most theologians believe that when we set out from our homes to go and serve on the altar or go into the house of worship, there is a wall of fire surrounding us. And our own venerable John Antonio Tello Nelson is one priest who associated with this doctrine, that our movement from our homes to the altar is not casual. It's a serious journey that we must take seriously. There is a wall of fire surrounding you as you go and worship. More so as you go onto the altar to serve. We are also told that once we mount the altar, everything will change. I say, once we mount, it's a theological doctrine that when you mount the altar, everything about your life must change. And so we cannot approach this task casually. It is a call on us to be spiritually prepared. Our question is, do we prepare spiritually before we mount the altar? I don't know if my chief server is here from La St. Paul, if that practice is still there. But in our time in the late 90s, we had a practice where as a server on rota, you have to appear 30 minutes before time. And we congregated at the Calvary and prayed fervently before climbing the altar. I don't know if it's still prevalent there. How do we prepare? How do we get up spiritually before mounting the altar? Do we mount the altar casually? And again, Reverend Canon Ampinteta will tell us, from Monday to Sunday, you should be on fire if you're on rota and have to serve. You don't have to come casually and walk around. The altar is a sacred place, and that is why we do not just allow anyone to mount. How do we mount the altar? How do we prepare to mount the altar? It is no. As to what that practice did for us physically, with my carnal mind, then and today, I can't tell. But spiritually, we knew that preparation was worthwhile. Do we prepare adequately spiritually before we mount the altar? Getting up mentally is a call on us to have the right mindset when we mount the altar. Because some of us mount the altar with so much attitude. Do we have the mind of Christ when we mount the altar? Or we think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think? We should have the mind of Christ as people submitting absolutely to the divine will and direction of God. The attitude is too much. You are serving as taper with someone whom you think you are more advanced or you are better than. Two acolytes, and you think you are better than the other person. Mentally, do we mount the altar to serve God with our mind, or we want the praise and glory of men? Some of us even mount the altar because we have seen a lot. We wait for guests to come, and then that is when we want to showcase our skills. You are not mounting the altar casually. That mindset is wrong. If you are to get up totally in submission to the will. And don't mount the altar because there is a girl you spoke to during the week who never yielded to your demands. And so on Sunday, that is when you have to mount the altar and show her how skillful you are. That mindset is wrong. You are not gathered up. You are gathered up casually and carnally. And that is not part of our ministry. How prepared are we to get up mentally? Getting up spiritually. Our work is not done haphazardly. Our service ministry, there is method and protocol in our worship and in our service. When you look at the complete robe of the bishop and that of the priest and then the service, there is method. As we are seated, there is method in our appearance. And that translates into the lives of the early Christians. When people saw their complete lifestyle and how they present and carry themselves, they said, these are Christians because they have been with Christ. Physically, how do we mount the altar? You cannot mount the altar and say you are gathered up with yellow shoes, wine, trousers, black shirt, and robe. You cannot do that. You are not gathered up physically. There must be protocol. When you see Muslims getting up to go and worship, there is method, there is respect. You can tell that they are gathered up fully for the worship. You can't mount the altar casually. And I mentioned that that's why we do not allow just anyone to walk onto the altar. How prepared are we spiritually, mentally, and physically? Having gathered up spiritually, mentally, and physically, we are being called upon to serve boldly. How bold are we? In his famous Art of War, there was a Chinese military general, a strategist, who felt that for you, or recommended that for you to win battles, you must appear to be weak even when you are strong, and appear to be strong even when you are weak. Christians are being taught humility. But in our humility, we must be bold. And so that explains why the Pope of the Catholic Church, in fact, the highest episcopal office of the Roman Catholic faith, he is addressed as the servant of the Lord's servant. We must be humble, but not as slaves. We are being called upon today to be bold. But how do we attain that level of boldness before God and mount the altar? Our boldness comes not by our physical stature, but our boldness comes from our heart of contrition, our repentance and our confession. The account of Hebrew tells us that let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. This boldness cannot be faked. You cannot claim boldness on the altar when you have not shown any contrition in your heart, when you have not repented and confessed your sins and put on the robe of piety, not faked or feigned piety, but a connection in your heart that tells God you are a sinner who is here to save. That is when we can be bold. Servers are being called to be bold in their ministry. But that boldness can be attained only when we are clean. We have to be bold to conquer sin, bold to conquer the world, poverty, and all the crises, the shame of this world. We have to conquer them as servers. We have to be bold to conquer them. Serving boldly also requires that as servers, we should be ourselves. We should not allow anyone to use our heads for us. We should break away from conformity. We know the kind of things that we do, and we believe collectively as servers that are unwholesome for the ministry. People, past servers, have established what Christians call today Jeroboam systems, practices, beliefs, ideas, and stuff that are not worthy of our calling. We should be bold to break away from these vices and speak truth to power. We should be bold to raise leaders amongst us who will be courageous enough to speak the truth and say, this is wrong. This cannot help the cause of the church. Are we bold enough to say and do this? We cannot continue to conform to established practices. We should be able to challenge the status quo and think for ourselves and offer different alternatives for our forward march as servers. Are we bold? Are we clean? Can we speak truth to power? Having gathered up and serving boldly, we must transform the church. Our ministry as servers is meaningless until it is linked with the total transformation of our church. What we do around the ministry, our values of hard work, our values of commitment, perfection, should translate into the ultimate outcome, which is the growth. Whatever we do as servers should have an uncompromising relationship with the growth of the church. We cannot live in a silo and think it's an end in itself. The servers ministry is all that we know. We should think outside the box and have the broader outlook as our main agenda as servers. Christ has admonished us that if we fail to bear fruits, what will happen to us? We'll be cut off. What fruits are we bearing? If we want to translate our values into the growth of the church, the question that confronts all of us is, what values are we exhibiting? What fruits are we bearing? Are we bringing more people to the church? Are we planting discord? Are people leaving the church because of our attitudes? Transforming the church. In the past, servers were deluded into thinking. We deluded ourselves into thinking that the only way by which we can grow the church is to transition to become priests. That is no. Servers, you can be a senior server, chief server, experienced server, but without the right attributes, without the calling. If you are a server and you aspire to be a priest, there is a problem. The priesthood ministry is a calling. It's not about seniority. Otherwise, Hophni and Phinehas were present when Samuel was called, our patron Samuel was called. So it's not about seniority. There are other ministries equally relevant to the cause of the progress of our church. As the account of Paul to the Corinthians. In the great man's house, there are not only vessels of gold and of silver. There are also wood and earthenware. If you sanctify yourself, God will use you for the right cause of the church. So let's not aspire to be priests at all costs. The priesthood ministry comes with its sets of values. Can you heal? Can you counsel? Can you evangelize? Can you prophesy? Without these ingredients, you cannot aspire to be a priest and say that is the only thing by which you can contribute to the growth of the church. Look elsewhere. There are so many other things we can do to transform the church. Let us wait for the calling before we join the priesthood ministry. Transforming the church also means uniting for a common cause. Are we united? Service. Don't we have divisions and factions amongst ourselves? When it comes to selection of a chief server, are we united? When it comes to selection of PCC members, are we united? And I think it's the selection of a chief server that is the most difficult one. It's fraught with a lot of confusion, division, and discord. I remember in my own time, 2002, thereabout, I think the criteria is to have 3 senior servers and the priest will select one. There were some priests who felt that they could have their way, so they would select any one of the 3 they like. But there was this young man in the group who had then studied political science and was having all the principles in his mind. So he wanted to live by those principles in the church and told the priest, you cannot do that. We are in a democratic dispensation. So let us choose for ourselves a chief server. There was fire in Ladadekotopon. As we speak, that fire is not quenched. It's not doused. And funny enough, this guy had to leave the church eventually, and he's now the district treasurer for the local Presbyterian ministry. Are we having synergy? Collectively, are we united to promote the good of the church? We must review our regulations so that we can harmonize. The selection criteria in law, is it the same as Teshin, Nongwa, and across? We have to enforce this to the letter and make sure we are together and not divided. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Whilst we serve boldly to transform the church, we must focus on transforming our nation. And I dare say that all our values, if we can live our values on a daily basis, and let me remind us, there is so much discipline in the guild, integrity, respect, humility in the serving ministry, planning, organization, attention to details, teamwork, and continuous improvement. These are time-tested values in the serving ministry. Above all, let me add, holiness. If we are to live these values truly, we are going to transform our nation. Servers and Christians must influence not just their local parishes, but their nation and the world at large. But what values do we exhibit? Mahatma Gandhi was a Hindu who decided to join Christianity because he had heard about the message of Christ and he was convinced. So he decided to join a Christian family. At the entrance, ushers told him he doesn't belong in there and that he is different. He is dark, he is poor, and the church of Christ was not meant for such people. And he said, if it weren't for Christians, I would be a Christian. What values are we living out there? If it weren't for Christians, I would be a Christian. Our attributes must transform the world. We must embrace all ideas and faiths before we can transform our nation. To transform nation also means that we should be able to embrace all faiths. Servers must also endeavor to transform nation. We must endeavor to be the best in whatever we do. If you're a carpenter and you're serving, you should be the best carpenter in the community. If you're an accountant in your office, you should strive to be the best. Because perfection, organization, planning, attention, and discipline and commitment are all regular features of our principles. We have to be the best in whatever we do, and that is how we can transform our nation. We must also be good citizens, not just on the altar, but everywhere we find ourselves. We must uphold the values of good citizenship behavior, respect for the rights of others, and the laws of our land. And above all, we have to be good human beings wherever we find ourselves. And that is how we can transform our nation. We must not only respond to our parochial church needs, we must respond to the broader agenda. We should be global citizens as servers. Today, if we find ourselves in Canterbury, can you serve on the altar and still make a difference? We are global citizens. We should have a global outlook as servers. The whole essence of our ministry is to transform people. My own story, as I stand before you, is a story of a young man like you, frustrated in a community characterized by menial jobs, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, truancy, fornication, and people without God. This is the community I grew up in. We lived and schooled with other children in the community, but they remained the same when we completed school. It was not the school environment that transformed us. It was the serving ministry. And so if you go back into my community today, you'll find them. You still find people I grew up and schooled up to JHS level, up to secondary school level. They are still the same. I am fortunate as I stand before you. I'm an evidence of what the Servants Guild can do for God and country. So the way forward, we must embrace the idea of lifelong learning. We have to continue learning. Learning doesn't end. Doesn't stop anywhere. We have to continue. If it's about carpentry, any trade, you have to continue to read and understand the world around you. That is the only sure way we can transform. AI platforms are available. The Internet of Things and other sophisticated platforms can teach us to understand our world better. We must also be intentional about investing in the youth if we really want to transform the church and nation. We must invest our time, our talent, our tenets, our teaching, timeless leadership values. We must continue to coach and mentor the youth to imbibe the right values of courage, hard work, integrity by which they can change the world. The church should also believe in the potential of the youth and by extension the service. In the past, servers were regarded as just one of those children out there. No respect for us, were treated with so much contempt and disdain. But today, we must view the server as a unique asset that has potential, that can be nurtured and harnessed for church growth and national development agenda. I know we are doing a lot, but there is more we can do as a church. Finally, we need to remind ourselves, if we feel we don't have what it takes to transform the church, the right talent to survive, transform the church and the nation, let me remind you that the church is still the biggest platform for free skill acquisition. And this is a post I picked from a friend somewhere. The church is still the biggest platform for free skill acquisition and human capital development. For example, when the pastor delivers his sermon and someone else comes to deliver the announcement, that is public speaking. You can learn from that and become a public speaker. When you plan and execute church programs and events are progressing in the church, that is project management. You can learn something from that. When the pastor starts preaching and says, I will be done in 5 minutes and exceeds, you know something is wrong. That is wrong time management. You can pick something from that. When the church donations are appropriated according to projects they can sustain, that is financial management. You can also learn something from that. When people do not want to obey simple instructions and the usher refuses to react and remains calm, that is emotional intelligence. You can pick something from that. Not to think of technical and digital skills, multitasking in the church, crisis management and all, are all findable in the church. And we all know that number of professional musicians who started from the choir. So the church is a heaven, a cornucopia for skill development by which we can transform our lives and transform nations. As we get up spiritually, mentally, and physically while serving boldly to transform church and nation, my prayer for the Servants Guild is something that resonates with the Anglican hymnal 491, which was originally composed by George William Tarrant. And I quote, "Now praise we, great and famous men, the fathers named in story, and praise the Lord, who now, as then, reveals in man his glory. Praise we the wise and brave and strong, who graced their generation, who helped the right and fought the wrong, and made our folk a great nation." This is my prayer, and this is going to be our story. I say,